Привit moi druzy. Hello, my friends. My name is Gerdes. I'm a professor who helps you understand context and meaning behind what's going on in Ukraine. Today, I want to talk about Prigozhin, and my question was, is he schizophrenic? Now, I'm not trying to be clickbaitish, but I don't mean schizophrenic as he like mentally ill. I mean, is he saying contradictory statements? Because what came out over the weekend seemed to be very contradictory to other statements. And so I'm going to unpack all this, but I'm going to start here. So one of my viewers said this: any comments on Prigozhin's April 14th, 2023 blog post calling for end of war in Ukraine? In my opinion, Prigozhin was trying to cover his rear end, but Abu of the Fifth Column had a different interesting point on it. Any thoughts on it? So you can watch Bo of the Fifth Column and you can watch other sources. And I would argue that what you ought to do is triangulate and look at multiple sources in order to identify what is actually true. Okay, so with that, let's look at these things. And by the way, in the last few days, I've been trying to really get behind what's going on. Like we talked about Seymour Hersh yesterday and what he was saying about Zelensky and what his sources were like. We talked about altering Zelensky's words and what happens when the press actually just takes little snippets of things instead of the full story. Talked about Scott Ritter and Judge Napolitano as they were talking about Russian talking points. So here I want to talk about, so we're going to go and we're going to look at Prigozhin. Now Prigozhin is not a good character. I mean, he's very bad in many ways. He's the head of PMC Wagner. He's wanted by the FBI. But here the claims, if you listen to the press report from this past Friday, you would have a totally different picture than what I think you ought to have as a picture of him. And we're going to go through a couple of articles, then we're going to go through the ISW, then we're going to go through his actual statements. I'm going to, like, line by line work through what he said. And so if you're the kind of person that really cares about Ukraine, you're going to enjoy this and you'll stay with me to the very end so that you understand the big picture. I would also ask, please give a like if you can so that this can spread and others can see it. Okay, here we go. Wagner boss claims Russia's mission is accomplished in Ukraine. Did he really say that? Well, let's go and look at it. Wagner Group founder Yevgeny Prigozhin says Russia has already accomplished its goals in Ukraine, but must keep fighting even if it means humiliating defeat so that the country can ultimately rise again as a war monster. They already won, but they must keep fighting so that they can be defeated and rise again. What exactly is he? I mean, it does sound kind of schizophrenic. I mean, it's hard to follow what he's saying. Prigozhin appeared to admit that Ukraine may win back its territories and acknowledged that the Kremlin's plan had failed and predicted a full-blown revolution in Russia. Okay, so this is taken by some media outlets as, see, well, we've already failed. And so if you only take bits and pieces, you don't get the full story. He claimed that, in theory, Russia had already put a decisive end to the war by wiping out a huge chunk of Ukraine's male population, sending refugees fleeing, and seizing territory. Omitted, of course, was that the same could be said about Russia on the first 2 points. Prigozhin also appeared to admit that Ukrainian territories seized by Russia aren't actually with Moscow forever, as the Kremlin has so often claimed. That's a really interesting thought. Lest anyone think that he is suggesting that Russia should call it quits, however, Prigozhin went on to cheer on a planned counteroffensive by Ukraine, saying that the sooner it starts, the better. So that what? His solution, strangely, is for Russia to let itself sink to rock bottom by doubling down even further despite its myriad losses over the past year. So it will cause almost a collapse. They'll go to the bottom and then they'll rise up better than before. Russia cannot accept any agreement, only a fair fight. And if we come out of this battle battered, there's nothing to worry about, he says. Okay, so that's the article that you get. This is Yahoo News, and it's really a Daily Beast article. And it doesn't matter that it's a Daily Beast. I'm not worried about that. Radio Free Europe just does almost as bad of a job of interpreting this as what the Daily Beast did. So Wagner Group head urges Moscow to wind down war in Ukraine. Is that what he said? So here, in a statement published on Telegram on April 15th, Prigozhin urged Moscow to declare its goals in Ukraine as achieved and bring an end to the fighting there. Prigozhin wrote that many of those who yesterday supported the special operation today have either doubts or are categorically opposed to what is happening. Now that's the end of the article, but if you want to read another article, you can click here. And when you do, you come to this article. And here you go. this is the head of PMC Wagner proposed to declare the goals of the war in Ukraine achieved. That's the article. This is so poorly written. I'm embarrassed that it is in Radio Free Europe. Okay, it's embarrassing. The head of PMC Wagner, Yevgeny Prigozhin, in the program material in his blog. By the way, this is a translation, so I'm not embarrassed by the wording. I'm embarrassed that it's so poorly interpreted what was here that it gives you one impression when I think what he's actually saying is something else. And I'll show you what I mean in just a moment. Head of PMC Wagner, Prigozhin, in the program material in his blog, proposed to stop the war in Ukraine, declaring its goals achieved. The text argues that a long war does not find support in the Russian elites. They are called the deep state in the article. So when he refers to the deep state later, he's talking about the Russian oligarchs. Representatives of the deep state want to urgently return to their normal life, old habits, and comfort. It's probably true. As Prigozhin writes, the impending offensive of the Ukrainian army may end with a breakthrough on the front line. It may, and he's admitting that that may be one scenario in which that happens. According to him, such a development of events could lead to a social explosion that threatens all members of the elites, except for the top Russian leadership. Okay, and then it talks about a little bit about Prigozhin, about PMC Wagner, about some of the documents published in the American intelligence leaks, that kind of thing. And that article, I remember distinctly. It was Saturday morning. I'm in a park. I'm listening to the article. Like I have articles played to me on. I put it in instant reader and then go to a voice reader, so I can listen to it. And I listened to it and I thought that doesn't sound right. Something's not right. I mean, part of me wanted to cheer that on. Part of me wanted to go, that's great. Part of me wanted to say, I'm glad to see that Prigozhin is coming to this perspective. And then part of me said, something just doesn't sit right. Well, I know now what didn't sit right. So I did a couple things. One, I ran this article through GPT-0, which is a AI device, just because I was curious myself to see if it was AI generated, because it was so bad. And it was not. It was written by a human, so I can check that off safely. Now, then I saw this on the ISW, the Institute for the Study of War, on April 15th, and they said this: reporting from some Western sources that Wagner Group financier Prigozhin called for Russia to end its war in Ukraine is inaccurate. Okay, so you can't just trust a Western source. You have to triangulate even on multiple Western sources in order to get at the truth, or have somebody do it for you. And I'm not even just saying me. If you hear me, triangulate with other folks that you listen to or read or whatever to see if I'm telling you the truth, because I might get it wrong. Okay, Prigozhin, April 14th essay on potential Ukrainian counteroffensive miscontextualized a rhetorical statement in which Prigozhin established a straw man argument he attributed to Russia's internal enemies who seek to rationalize Russia's ending the war in Ukraine now. The point of his essay was to attack this straw man, not to advance it. So he's not trying to say we should end this war. He's setting up the straw man and then slashing it down so that he can say, no, we got to keep going. That's very different than what you saw in these headlines here, where Wagner boss claims Russia's mission accomplished in Ukraine. That's not what he's saying. Or this headline here in Radio Free Europe: Wagner Group head urges Moscow to wind down the war in Ukraine. That's not what he's saying. Okay, Prigozhin actually called Russia to commit to a decisive fight that will either defeat Ukraine or result in a temporary Russian defeat that will catalyze Russia's nationalist rebirth and set conditions for future victory. They'll get destroyed and then have to rise from the ashes like they did after World War II or World War I in Germany or Japan, right? So that's what they're actually saying. Reading Prigozhin's public communications is not a straightforward undertaking. Yeah, he sounds schizo in the way that he talks. I mean, he's like all over the map. He's not. He's trying to make a point, but I wouldn't give him an A. Let me put it like that. Prigozhin's isolated quotes, separated from the full context of his messages, often lose their initial meaning, and that's kind of what's going on in these kinds of articles. You're not getting the full context of what's being said. Certain Russian players in the information space have also misinterpreted Prigozhin's essays further exposing fissures between some Russian mill bloggers. So it's not just Western authors or Western article writers who are getting it wrong. It's also, even internally, the Russian mill bloggers. One endorsed Prigozhin's actual argument that the uncomfortable truth is that Russia must continue to fight. Another, this is Igor Girkin, an enemy of Prigozhin, leaned into the misinterpretation. Prigozhin's essays may contribute to fuel the debate among existing cleavages of the Russian information space. So even Russian mill bloggers are at odds about what's going on. Okay, so this is the actual article in his Telegraph. I don't speak Russian, I don't read Russian, so what I had to do is I had to have it translated here, and I have it here in this document. We're going to go through it. It's a long document, but you'll understand what he's talking about. You'll understand he's a little out there as well, but you'll understand what he's talking about by the time we're done. PMC Wagner continues to grind the Ukrainian army on Bakhmut. Zelensky sends more and more units into this meat grinder, into a destructive funnel that sucks the best units of the armed forces of Ukraine and mercenaries. So there is a legitimate fight, but he kind of thinks that the Russians are winning, and that's an open question. The strategic role of Bakhmut is not so great. He's right. Bakhmut is followed by Servisk, Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, and a number of other of these cities, Chasiv Yar and others, settlements that are part of the so-called Donbas Ring and form a fortified area. On the one hand, Bakhmut is part of this fortified area. On the other, the capture of Bakhmut itself will not ensure a short-term victory over Ukraine. Now, this is why I say he's schizophrenic in some ways, because he was talking about how this would be such a great victory over Ukraine because this is such a strategic point just a few weeks or months ago. And so it sounds contradictory. The road to the Dnieper, or even the capture of Donbass. The Ukrainian army has gathered a sufficient number of forces, about 200,000 already, sufficiently trained fighters who have undergone 2 to 3 months of training. These 2,000 go onto the offensive in various directions. The armed forces of Ukraine lose from 30 to 50 pieces of equipment every day. Now, I'm not sure what the numbers are. I'm sure he's seeing it through his lens, his grid, his worldview. I can't speak to that particular point. However, announced on the 1st of 20 December, then on January 1, then the end of January, then February 24th, then April 3 to 5, and now on April 15th, the offensive is postponed every time. Now, he's writing on April 14th, and so there's going to be this offensive, this offensive, this offensive. It's coming, it's coming, it's coming. That's what he's saying. If the armed forces of Ukraine do not go on the offensive in the near future, the war will reach a stalemate, and that is a continual rushing talking point. They kind of want it to stalemate so they can kind of keep what they have. Okay, the political aspects of Bakhmut. Politically, Bakhmut is of little interest to the Kyiv regime. Actually, it's of major interest to the Kyiv regime because it is a symbolic place now at this point. At the same time, the long battle for Bakhmut is extremely beneficial for Russian troops because they have already squeezed a large piece of Ukrainian territory in 2022. I think by that he says they've already taken a large piece of territory, and it's beneficial to kind of hold the troops there and let them secure. I think that's what he's saying. I could be wrong. Tell me if I'm wrong. If at any point you think that I'm wrong, put it in the comments below. Tell me about it. I can learn from you just as much as you can learn from me. Bakhmut made it possible for the Russian army to build up strength. So what he's talking about, if you can keep the army pinned down, they can build up their strength elsewhere. Bakhmut is extremely beneficial for us. We grind the Ukrainian army there and restrain their maneuvers. To some degree, he might be right, but the grinding at what cost is it grinding you? Dramatic pause. The military operation of the part of the Ukraine is tactically controlled by the Ukrainian military, true, and strategically by the so-called Western coalition led by England and the United States, probably also true. In early April, there was a leak of documents from the Pentagon. And by the way, that last point, controlled by the United States is not like dictating, but they've got a lot of Western partners trying to give the best advice they can to help the Ukrainians get where they're trying to go. Okay, so they're talking about the Pentagon leak now. The leak was widely publicized. Statements from sources close to the Pentagon began about the need to slow down the offensive and announced on April 15th. Now, he's writing on the 14th about what's going to happen with the 15th, or about the, it's going to slow down what's going to be coming on the 15th. So he's talking about the Pentagon leak, and then he says this really interesting line. Perhaps 21-year-old Jack Teixeira, I believe that's pronounced Texiera. I went to school with somebody with that last name, Texiera. Leaked documents foolishly. Perhaps he was used in the dark, but if this leak had not happened, it would certainly have had to been invented the next day. Right? Like they need an excuse, is what he's saying, a pretext to not go on with the offensive. That's what he's trying to explain here. There are a huge number of conspiracy theories about the events of the 90s and then of 2014, the Maidan in Ukraine and the transfer of Crimea under the control of the Russian Federation. There certainly are, especially from the Russian side, which is saying that the CIA created the 2014 revolution and they were behind it. I don't believe that that's the case. Read Ukraine's Maidan, Russia's war, and you'll get a better sense of how that works. It's a historian, I believe he's at Harvard now, who was there at the time and documents everything very well. The United States and the Anglo-Saxon group for a long time hatched a plan for the collapse of the USSR as the main geopolitical competitor. Okay, so in the 90s and 80s, no, they weren't really doing that. They hoped for it, but they were pretty taken off guard in 91 when it collapsed. So fragmentation of African states, the collapse of the former Warsaw Pact countries. The basis of modern U.S. policy is financial neo-colonization. Okay, they love talking about this in RT and Pravda and TASS and other Russian-controlled media. Why? Okay, and here he's trying to explain how the richest countries in mineral resources do not process the wealth of their mineral resources, but are fully integrated into the production and financial flows proposed by Western partners, becoming American satellites, subcontractors, and puppets. Okay, but if they can't actually extract their minerals out of the ground, they can work with a partner, they can make money, the partner can make money, everybody wins, and if they're paying attention, they can figure out how to do it themselves over time. Therefore, the financial task of the United States, or the final task of the United States in Ukrainian confrontation, is to launch powerful centrifugal impulses in Russia, weaken the power and national self-consciousness in society, and force it to turn toward the West as it was in the early 1990s. So they're trying to make Russia Western-looking as Ukraine is, and that's what the goal of the evil United States is. And I'm not sure that that's necessarily the case, but we just don't want the bad behavior that is going on now. We weren't that into you on February 23rd of 2022, but on February 24th, when you invaded your neighbor, destabilized the world, yeah, you got our attention in a big way. Okay. When the special operation began and the Russian Federation was not able to achieve the results that society expected, the United States had the opportunity to return to its original plan. They've always been after us, is what he's saying. The original plan, I repeat once again, was as follows: to destroy the Soviet Union. Well, yeah, I mean, the Soviet Union collapsed under its own weight. This has almost been achieved. We first lost control and then good neighborly relations. Well, you kind of did that to yourself when you invaded your neighbor, okay? The collapse of Russia by military means cannot happen. Yes, it can. It can happen to any country, and it can happen. Always in history, the enemy who reached Moscow as a result shamefully fled. Well, and that has been historical with Napoleon and with the Germans, and okay, but that doesn't mean that that's always going to happen. Why are the Anglo-Saxons holding back Zelensky, arranging internal conflicts and slowing down the offensive? Just in order to break the main jackpot, the collapse of Russia into many principalities. Now, I've heard people talk about how some say that they would like to see that. That's terrifying to me. I don't want to see that happen. I want to see Russia remain as it is, at least long enough to get reparations that will flow to Ukraine, get your children back from Russia to Ukraine, and rebuild what needs to be rebuilt. Then I would like to see Russia dealt with like Japan was after World War II, where Japan's no longer really that aggressive, or Germany after World War II, because systems are put in place to keep this from happening again. I don't want to see the breakup of the country, or at least not into tribal warlords. Okay, the deep state is a community of near-state elites that operate independently of political leadership. So what he's probably talking about are oligarchs, and he's been involved with some infighting with them. The Russian deep state is currently in a serious crisis. Many of those who supported the special operation yesterday are now in doubt or categorically against what is happening. The representative, well, they didn't necessarily really support it. What actually happened there was that they were kind of browbeat into supporting it. They didn't want this. The representatives of the deep state want to urgently return to their normal lives. Yeah, they're losing billions and having their money sanctioned and captured and whatever else. At meetings, they are silent, express their doubts, and when making decisions on bureaucratic procedures, certain actions aimed at winning this war are hindered. These are internal enemies. So that's what he's talking about with the oligarchs and even some bureaucrats who are not supportive of the war. Okay, the super game. The ideal option is to announce the end of the NWO to inform everyone that Russia has achieved the results that it planned, and in a sense, we have actually achieved them. So he's saying, the ideal option for them is to announce the end of the effort. Okay, we've achieved our goal. We have ground a huge number of fighters of the armed forces of Ukraine, and we can report ourselves the tasks of the NMD have been completed. So again, this is a straw man that he's setting up. Theoretically, Russia has already received this fat point by destroying a large part of the active male population of Ukraine by intimidating another part of it, which fled to Europe. Russia has cut off the Sea of Azov and a large piece of the Black Sea, seized a fat piece of Ukrainian territory, created a land corridor to the Crimea. Now there is only one thing left: to firmly gain a foothold to claw those in these territories that already exist. But there's also a slyness. If earlier Ukraine was part of the former Russia, it is now absolutely nationally oriented state. That's right, it is looking west. But see what he's saying? He's talking about the oligarchs saying that they want to actually have, like, let's declare a victory. We've already achieved what we want. Before February 24th, 2022, the European Union was greedy to give Ukraine tens of millions of dollars. I think they're greedy. What they mean was, like, we didn't really want to give that. Now tens of billions are being turned off for the war. I think turned off for the war means given out to the war. It's just a translation issue. Of course, some of these funds please the pockets of the ruling elite of Ukraine, which benefits from the conflict. So they're saying the Ukrainian oligarchs are skimming off the top. And that's a common trope. And that's exactly the same kind of thing that Seymour Hersh was saying in his article over the weekend. Ukraine needs a victory. The U.S. needs a process. The Ukrainian leadership is getting rich, but due to the large losses of the population at the front and the general fatigue from the war, the political leadership needs a victory. Now, he said this. This was interesting. Preserving the existing borders on February 24th, 2023, not 2022, but 2023, is an exchange that the United States can offer the Russian leadership today as a negotiating position. That would say, keep everything that you just took. That's a non-starter. There may be various options for the development of events. One of them is that the armed forces of Ukraine will run into the defense of the Russian Federation, suffer serious losses, after which a colossal counteroffensive of the Russian troops will begin to the borders of the DPR or to the Dnieper, that's the Dnieper River, or even to Poland, take the whole country. So it could go that way, that the Ukrainians counterattack, the Russians counterattack, and take even the whole country. The second option is that the Ukrainian army will launch a counteroffensive and somewhere will be able to break through the defensive. Now, what he's saying is, even if that happens, this is a good thing. Let it happen. Bring it, is what he's saying. This can lead to global changes in Russian society. The people are already looking for someone to blame for the fact that we are not the strongest army in the world. And in this situation, they will look for an extreme. And at these extremes will, of course, be representatives of the deep state. So they're looking for who's to blame, and representatives of the deep state, the oligarchs. At the same time, nothing threatens the supreme power of Russia, since it's a symbol of national unity and resistance to the West. That's how they see Russia itself internally in Russia. And according to the existence of the tradition of the deep state, with any changes, try to improve their position by any means, including by betraying the interest of Russia. That's what the oligarchs will try to do. So there's an expression. So he's saying we have to continue this fight even if they say that they want peace, we should be continuing this fight, because if we continue this fight, guess what? We might lose, but we'll implode and then we'll rise again. Now watch, listen to what he has to say. There is an expression, go to the bottom, then push off and rise up again. This is what Americans are afraid of. No, this is not what Americans are afraid of. He's got that wrong, but this is his argument to fellow Russians. They're afraid that excessive pressure on Russia and an increase in the internal problems may pull her to the bottom. And if Russia reaches the bottom, pushes off from it, throwing off the burden of the deep state, then it will float up like a huge sea monster, demolishing everything in its path, including the plans of the United States. Again, this is not what the Americans are afraid of. I'm worried about that kind of creating a situation where it breaks up Russia into competing factions with nukes, but that and that they won't be able to do reparations easily or won't be able to get Ukrainian children back. But I'm not afraid that Russia will then be super Russia because they're beaten so badly. I'm not worried about that. The state will get rid of bureaucracy, processes will become transparent, and Russia will step by step turn into a bristling military monster which the international community will have to more than reckon with, to bend that at every deflection we see their parted buttocks. I'm not sure what he's talking about with, we'll have to see their parted buttocks, but okay. America is extremely unprofitable for Russia to reach the bottom and surface. So I think he's saying in the translation, it would be very bad for America financially or otherwise for Russia to reach the bottom, be so defeated, and then come up as this raging sea monster. Of course, such a development of events is unfavorable for Ukraine and Volodymyr Zelensky. They need to resist and fight. But if these processes happen quickly enough, within a year or two, then liberalized Americans, Western-facing deep state, will force the Russian authorities to make concessions and under various pretexts return those Ukrainian territories that are now under our control and which the West considers occupied. The oligarchs will betray us and give it back, is what he's saying. These processes, with the question, why did we fight then, will certainly launch the mechanism of centrifugal forces in the regions, and the Americans will get their way. And we don't want that to happen, because that's what the Americans are really after all along, is destroying our Russia. Okay, Russia cannot accept any agreement, only a fair fight. Now, this would actually have been the headline. Instead of what we saw in these, where we saw Wagner boss claims that mission accomplished in Ukraine, that wasn't the headline. And this is why you have to read original sources where you can. But this would have been the headline. Russia cannot accept any agreement, only a fair fight. And when we come out of this battle battered, there is nothing to worry about. The fortified regions of Russia make it impossible to penetrate into its depths. Nobody's trying to penetrate into your depths. Nobody is trying to create a war on your homeland in Russia itself. The Ukrainians just want to push you out of their territory, not go and take Moscow. So that's kind of a straw man that he's setting up. And the Russian people have never been broken down and will never break down. Therefore, only fair fight, and the sooner it starts, the better. Now that's really what he's after. He wants a fight, and the sooner the better. So it's kind of given the wrong impression. And last little bit, and either the armed forces of Ukraine will be defeated in a fair fight, or Russia will lick its wounds, build up muscles, and tear its rivals again in a fair fight. Listen, that's exactly what Zelensky has been saying all along. If we don't defeat them now, they come back later and they do it more again. And so that's why they have to be defeated, defeated, defeated. And his conclusion, see you at Bakhmut. Okay. That's the actual statement that he made. With all that being said, who's right? Is Yahoo News right with Wagner boss claims Russia's mission accomplished in Ukraine? Or the Radio Free Europe saying Wagner Group head urges Moscow to wind down war in Ukraine? Or was the Institute for the Study of War correct when they were saying that reporting from Western sources actually kind of got it wrong? So this is why you need to triangulate, and I would highly urge you to do that. Look, I want you to watch my videos, but I want you to watch other stuff too, right? So watch mine and then also triangulate in other sources and get a sense of what's going on. Okay, that's all that I have to say today. I hope that helps you actually understand what's going on. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the coffees. It encourages me by saying, hey, look, we appreciate what you're trying to do here. Thank you for being the kind of person that cares about this. If you're still listening to this, you are hardcore, you care about Ukraine, and you're willing to listen to all all that. Like, I was reading article after article, going through Prigozhin's actual words, which could be to some stunningly boring, and I understand that, but you are hanging there with me. Thank you for being that kind of person. Thank you for the likes, if you would do that. Thank you for subscribing. If you're wanting to see more of this, thank you for being that kind of person that cares about Ukraine.